So we'll wait on Wesley. Wesley's in charge of the presentation. Here we go. So thank you for having us this morning. And I'll apologize right now to Lou and Heather, but my back will be mostly to you, so hopefully it looks okay, but if it doesn't, I apologize. So we prepared this presentation for this meeting this morning, and so basically we're going to be looking, it's sort of a 10-year retrospective, what took place at the museum, so looking back at the last 10 years and looking forward to what the future looks like. Wesley? So here's our agenda, and I'd also like to start by acknowledging that the lands on which we gather this morning are the unceded lands of the Coast Salish people, but more specifically the Qualicum First Nations, whose historical relationship to this land continues strongly to this day. And I always like to add that I feel extremely privileged and blessed to call this place my home. So we'll be looking at the last 10 years and then looking toward the future. So here's a lovely picture of Art Skipsey. I was mentioning to Councillor Skipsey this morning that we included him because one reason the Skipsey family was very instrumental in starting this society way back when, and actually Cora Skipsey was one of the first presidents on the Historical Society, and Art was involved for years and years and years. But a quick background is in 1984, the Historical Society incorporated officially and started operating a museum out of the small historic Powerhouse building on the premises. And in 1993, they purchased the Port Alberni Powerhouse that was actually dismantled on site there. All the materials were logged over to Qualicum Beach, and the building was rebuilt brick by very dedicated volunteers that worked extremely hard, and it took about 2 years. And that's when, in 1995, that other brick building opened up its doors as our main museum building. And it was named the Macintosh, and if you have questions about that name, I recently looked into the story, the background of it, and it refers to the style or type of architectural building that is. An interesting note is both the brick buildings on the premises were done by the same architect way back when, and this was his signature building, a brick and steel building. He was a fellow out of Victoria. And in 1995, so that same year, Graham Beard brought his paleontology collection to our museum. It was initially in the Parksville Museum. In the year 2000, the annex was built, and that's the small gray building at the back of the premises on the grounds, and it was built to basically house all our collections, so including all the artifacts that are not on display and the archival collection, because initially the archives was in a small corner of the Macintosh building, and so this gave it more space. In 2014, we hired a consultant group out of Victoria to do what they call a site analysis. And basically what that does is it takes the space that we have available, looks at all our collection, and gives us a plan, so an interpretive plan and a revitalization plan for how to best utilize space available given what we had. And we asked for them to do this in a 5-stage plan, simply because we knew we wouldn't be able to implement it all in one go. So it gave us stages to work towards. So immediately, 2015, we started with the renovation in the Macintosh building. And in 2021, renovations began in the Powerhouse. And we'll expand more on that further in future slides. So our mission is to collect, preserve, and share the stories of Qualicum Beach for local citizens and visitors alike. And here are the 3 main themes that we cover in our exhibits. So social history includes First Nations, early settlers, tourism, education, industry, people, places, and events. Paleontology, Graham Beard being the curator and recently passed on his collection officially to the museum, has local fossils, but really is in a very unique collection. It also has pieces from all over the world. Graham Beard is well known in the field, and not that we try to be competing with Courtney or the Royal BC Museum, but we have this quite unique little collection that appeals a lot to scientists that come from all over the place to see it, but also local finds that Graham focuses on. We also have, of course, Rosie, the Ice Age walrus that was found in Qualicum Bay. And actually, we don't officially have Rosie anymore because Rosie now lives in Ottawa, where she is still studied by scientists. But it is a future dream, perhaps, to repatriate Rosie back to Qualicum. If we look at provenance, which is a term that we use in terms of artifacts and archival material, Rosie was found here, so therefore belongs here. So one day, perhaps, we can bring Rosie back. Another area of themes, power, energy, and communication, and that's the history of power in Qualicum Beach, and of course now we're focusing on the Powerhouse building. Science and electricity, and sustainable energy is one element that we'll try to include in our development of exhibits for that space, and that's coming up. So this is just an organizational chart to give you an idea of how things function internally. So you have the board of directors, you have a few committees, and then staff and volunteers. So the next two slides are just to give you an idea of the financials and how they're distributed. So here's our revenue, and good opportunity to thank the town of Qualicum Beach for your contribution. As you can see from this pie chart, 28% comes from this source, and we wouldn't be able to function operationally without this revenue. Other major is capital projects, and capital projects are mostly grant-based, and so we receive a lot of funding and actually operational funding from the BC Arts Council, as well as other projects from them. And one-time allocations are special projects, and part of that has definitely been taking place during the pandemic because we received a fair amount, we were very, very fortunate, a fair amount of what they called emergency funding from the BC Arts Council, as we were already a recipient of their operational funding program. And then other funds, 11%. And here are expenditures. So you can see the biggest part of our funds go towards payroll. And although there's only 2 part-time employees, for a short time there was 3, that's where the major part goes. And otherwise it's projects, so development of exhibits, major projects, continuing to implement our 5-phase interpretive plan and so forth, and otherwise operations. So buildings and grounds, so we're going to look at, here's a good sort of slide that shows you what buildings are on the premises and where they're located, and we'll tell you a little bit about what we've done in the past 10 years with regards to these. So the annex is the small brick building at the back of the premises, as I mentioned, built in 2000 rather. And so some of the changes we've done is in 2017 we've added more quality or professional shelving. The archives already had that, but the collections area didn't, so that was added. Climate control, that was also part of our fee-for-service agreement with the town, that was added in that building in 2018. And in 2020, we took some of our emergency funding that we received to create better workspace up in the archives, and a space that allowed for physical distancing between our volunteers. And because that was an area that we hadn't put a lot of time and energy into, and we had sort of 3 old desks that were sort of kitty-corner to one another. Now it looks really professional, and it's a good area to invest in because we get a fair amount of researchers that come and that we supply information to. In terms of the grounds, new gate and fence, that was something that I really worked hard with the board initially when I started in 2011 to say that some cosmetic, putting money into some of the cosmetics sides of things would be a good idea. So we changed the gate and fence, and you'll see some before and after pictures, and I think you'll agree with me that that was a good investment. The Cubie Heritage House was added to the premises. That was a small house that came from First Avenue, and it was going to be demolished, and we felt that it was a good example of early architecture in Qualicum Beach. We electrified and put a new roof on the gazebo, which we utilize a lot. The bear pole, rather, was moved from the powerhouse to outside and has a center space now in the garden. The anchor was just recently moved, and thank you to the town for being instrumental in that. Salish Sea mural, so we have a container, you see just at the back of the premises too. It's a shipping container that houses a lot of the paleontology collection that is not on display, and it's a shipping container, so it didn't look the best. And with some of the COVID funding we received, we hired a local indigenous artist, Ocean Highland, to come and paint a beautiful mural on it. Volunteer garden constantly in development, new signage that was unveiled last summer, and the tree slab just recently installed in the gazebo, and we'll talk more about that. Macintosh building, so renovations 2015, including beautiful new doors from a local artist. We updated security system, included outdoor lighting, and that was also for security reasons, new flooring and painting upstairs, as well as exhibits. New reception area and furniture that was done in COVID. You know, we all had to sort of spin around and figure out what was the right thing to do. Updating climate control is currently happening in the Macintosh building because that system was 30 years old and in need. Powerhouse, we received the SERP grant in the amount of $124,000. SERP is the Community Economic Recovery Infrastructure Program, and the first part of that has been taken place. It's the restoration of the Powerhouse, so that was just completed and unveiled last week. But now we'll be working on creating permanent exhibits in the space. So here's some pictures to speak to what we just had lined up. So the entrance, as you can see the gate, chain link fence, and it used to be a chain link with a padlock that I'd have to, in wintertime, bring my own antifreeze in order to enter the premises. So it's much nicer with the new gate. And of course you can see the portico has changed and the new doors. The old doors, I mean, you have to admire the forefathers. They worked hard and recouped everything. Those doors were from a school, gymnasium. But people came and often asked us, you know, they weren't sure where to enter the museum. So now with the glass doors, it's very clear, and the new entrance. Bear Pole, we freed the spirits, and it's now outside overlooking the Salish Sea. Powerhouse before and after. You know, I'm still amazed at that restoration. The space is incredible, and we're hoping that it can be utilized not just for traveling exhibits as it is currently, but also for community engagement projects, programs, events. There is our beautiful mural by Ocean Highland, and there is the slab of tree that came to us. So that was a collaboration between the town, the Heritage Forest, so the Brown Property Preservation Society, and the museum. But we find that it's got this beautiful focal point now under the gazebo, and very happy about the result. Here we have our Qualicum Beach Heritage House. So it was painted by volunteers. It's very much a volunteer-driven initiative, I have to say at this point. Painted the original colors of the train station, which we felt really created this a symbiotic space that aligns well with our other museum buildings. And there you see a town employee, 2 town employees moving the anchor, very fragile anchor at this point, and they did a great job. Gazebo before and after, new roof. We actually painted anti-skid paint on the floor, and that's before the slab was installed. But you can see a nice bench that was also refurbished by volunteers using 2 old benches, creating a new one that we like to say is COVID-friendly, because if one person sits at one end and another at the other end, they are 6 feet apart. And here's a glimpse at the museum gardens that we dedicated to Barbara Kula in July 2019. Barbara was extremely instrumental in having the gardens become a huge center point. She put a lot of energy into it, bringing in indigenous plants, drought-resistant plants, plants that could sustain the high sun that the garden gets. And we were very happy that we did that because Barbara passed away in February 2020, so it was a very timely dedication. So one thing that we've definitely focused on in the past 10 years and beyond is moving towards more professional museum standards at the Qualicum Beach Museum. So establish and continue to establish more professional policies and procedures. We digitized our archival material, and we continue to do so. We actually received a small grant from the Chamber of Commerce to acquire a large bed, high quality scanner. So we do a lot of our things in-house. Every once in a while we come to the town for some large items that cannot fit in our scanner, but normally we're quite self-sufficient there. Collections database is also been established, and so basically we have a database that includes our whole entire collection and artifacts and archival that is very useful for research purposes, for exhibit purposes, and so forth. Climate control, working on to have that up to speed in all our buildings. And reorg is a process that we went through, so consulting and getting certification from Canadian Conservation Institute, and it was quite a process to get there, and in the next few slides you'll see what that looked like. So here it is. So the first floor of the annex building was for the artifacts, but in order to get this certification, we needed to do some pretty serious changes, one of which was to get rid of our fridge. The first floor of the annex was a little bit of the staff room, food prep for events, and that's a big no-no if you keep your collections in that area. So got rid of the fridge. We kept the kitchen sort of sink and counter, but we actually changed the sink for a much larger one that allows us to wash or clean our artifacts there. So basically we changed the standards of that space and included our state-of-the-art shelving, rolling shelving, which we're very, very proud of. We feel like the big guys when it comes to this now. They are not only incredible for storing our artifacts, but they are superb for use of space because they roll and collapse and give us a lot of space to work with. Archives upstairs. Archives, I'm proud to say, always look good. I'm an archivist by trade, and so that has been a passion of mine from the early days. But what we have done is we've added more professional shelving there. We continue to really try to abide by archival standards, so in terms of acid-free that we utilize, and boxes, envelopes, so forth. But this is the new workspace that you see on the right there. That also allows for physical distancing. I think we're going to be talking about physical distancing for the rest of our lives, but that's what it looks like in an archival. So exhibits. A new First Nations exhibit in collaboration with Qualicum First Nations, and actually I would like to say not in collaboration, but it was fully Qualicum First Nations led, with Jesse Ricalma at the helm of that project. We received a very nice grant from the BC Arts Council for that initiative, and it took 2 years to develop, but we now have a Qualicum First Nations gallery at the museum. Paleontology, Graham Beard Theatre was added. We continue constantly to update that display. And a big aim was to make it more accessible to the public. As I mentioned, it has an incredible collection that appeals a lot to scientists, but we wanted the visitors to be able to come and see this exhibit and come out with some knowledge. So for them to come out with some sort of basic understanding. So that has been the focus when it comes to that display. We also were, we managed to participate in a Virtual Museum of Canada project, so we now have actually a virtual exhibit that focuses on paleontology on that website. Social history, new oral history theater, we moved upstairs. Our displays, which we always continue to develop, to decolonize, indigenize, diversifying the stories that we tell, is a very important focus we have. And now, of course, the new Powerhouse Exhibits that will be featuring power and energy, renewable energy, climate change concerns, and that is an aim for spring of 2023. So here's some pictures. We had Minister Scott Fraser come and visit. That's when we had the traveling exhibit, Our Living Languages, which is all about revitalization of Indigenous languages in BC. Actually, just quickly, thankful to the town, because when we got that traveling exhibit from the Royal BC Museum, some of the interactive pods were too big, and they were actually came to the town hall. So that was great, collaboration. But here you see Jesse beaming that Minister Scott Fraser was very pleased with the exhibit. That also includes some Pentlatch language, as the Qualcomm First Nations are working on their own revitalization. More on our exhibits. To the right here, you have a slide. We developed a fish, trees, and folk that speaks to the past of forestry, logging, fishing in this area, but also with an angle of how important it is for the fish that feed the forests and their effect on climate as well. And here's our Paleontology Museum. On the right, you have a quick glimpse at the virtual exhibit on the Virtual Museum of Canada. And on the left is how we continue to constantly work on that exhibit to, as I say, make it more accessible to the public. And we work with a fellow called Matthias Ronicky with Lime Designs out of Victoria. And he helped us with our outdoor signage. We have a great relationship going with him now. And he really gets what it is to be a small community museum, but with big goals. Traveling exhibits. I was at a BCMA conference years and years ago where the Royal BC Museum had made a presentation where they spoke about how they were failing one of their mandates, and that was to support small community museums in the province. And how, to remedy that, they were going to make traveling exhibits available to them. Well, I think I was the first person in the lineup at their table past that presentation, and I felt that as we are in Qualicum Beach, only a couple of hours away from them, we could welcome all the traveling exhibits they had, and that's what we set out to do in the following years. Sometimes I would be down there picking them up in my own vehicle, but I did what I needed to do to bring those to Qualicum. And here, one of them, which I felt was a big coup, was Our Living Languages. A fantastic exhibit that we had. And currently, Broken Promises, that comes to us from the Nikkei Museum and Cultural Center out of Richmond. And I encourage everybody to come and see that exhibit if you haven't, and please tell your friends and neighbors and family to come along. So community engagement, I won't read all of these out, but these are some of the examples of things that we're doing. Children's Museum Day had a short hiatus during COVID, but we're bringing that back. Our Cubie Reads ongoing, vintage sale, the Cubie ukulele band contacted us last year. They wanted to continue to meet, but they didn't know, wanted a safe place. So the gazebo was where they came, and it was fantastic. On Fridays, you could hear them playing away. School programming and community programming. So we received also a grant from the BC Arts Council to redo our school programs. Those were 10 years old at this point, and they were very much in need of being redone. They no longer quite aligned to the changes in the BC curriculum, so that was important for us to do. And we also wanted to include these big concepts of historical thinking and object-based learnings that are very much in the museum world now, but also part of the curriculum. So we got a very nice grant, but we all of a sudden had to pivot in the middle of developing these programs because COVID set in. And in conversation with the schools, what they wanted was kits to go out to them and not bring the kids to the museum anymore, which we weren't sure when that could happen. So we worked again with Matthias out of Victoria to create these great kits. We brought one here, so you can play around with it after the meeting if you'd like to. But these are the kits that go out to the schools, and we basically we can work with the teachers based on what they really want to focus on. We take artifacts and material from our archival collection, and we send the kits out to them. And it's been very, very successful so far. So carry on with that. Our Cubie Reads is going on for 5 years now. And happy to say that we don't even organize it anymore. The authors contact us directly. They've heard about it, and they want to be part of it. So it's kind of taken a life of its own. So I've given you a big overview of all the things that we've done. 2 part-time employee for a short time 3, so you can see that this would not be possible without the help of volunteers and our members to make sure all our programs do go on. So we have over 30 volunteers on a regular basis that help us with all the different areas that we work with: archives, artifacts, collections, you know, front of house, welcoming guests, governance, of course, maintenance, special events, our garden, exhibits, and our members are fantastic at supporting us financially as well. So major improvements, this is a little bit of a repetition, so I won't go through it all, but it tells you what we've been up to, sort of concludes what we've been up to here. Funding. So local, municipal, as you've seen from the pie charts, Town of Qualicum Beach, instrumental with your operational and matching grant. We do receive sometimes from the PQB Foundation and the TD Bank. Provincially, I've mentioned over and over again, BC Arts Council, operational and project funding, and they just literally showered us with COVID emergency funding. Very, very, very fortunate. Community gaming grant, and not just for programs, but recently we got one for a capital project, and that's replacing the climate control in the Macintosh building, SEREP, and some other small grants provincially. Federal, or Canada Summer Jobs, we receive yearly for our summer students, and a few others, and then fund development, some of the activities that we do as a museum to make sure that we also create some funding internally. So collaborations, and Qualicum First Nations is at the top end. We have a memorandum of understanding, Indigenous belongings policy, and consultation processes, but I'd like to say that we move beyond consultation and collaboration when it comes to Qualicum First Nation, and we do what I call co-creation. They are instrumental in our exhibit committee. There's 2 members that sit on the committee, and we do exactly that. We co-create from the start to the end of an exhibit. And I think that speaks to the success that the exhibit development has had. Town of Qualicum Beach, we have our 5-year fee for service, and just a heads up, it's going to be up for renewal in the fall. So if some of you are here, then keep the presentation in mind. Community organizations, here they are listed. Heritage organizations, there are several, and I won't say them all. And of course, we continue always to collaborate with the school district. And I think we work very closely more and more with them to make sure that our school programs really align with their needs. So what's next? Future plans. We want to continue to develop the museum collections, exhibits, and programming. Continue to decolonize and diversify the stories that we tell. That has been something that has been a focus for a very, very long time. The forefathers and people that worked hard to create this museum did it. It was mostly, the exhibits were mostly settler-based, and it made sense. It was what was available, what was known at the time. But we know now that there's many stories to tell that are lesser known and that are important to bring to the forefront and to the surface, and that's what we're working on. We're always going to be welcoming traveling exhibits. We know the power and potential that they have, and so that's going to be a focus. Continue to improve our paleontology collection, exhibit, and the storage. The storage is a little bit of a sore spot, or a difficult spot, in the sense it's a container and it really needs work. It's not proper storage for this collection, but it was used as an emergency measure, but we need to spend some time and energy on that, organizing it better. Improving accessibility, and that's something I really would like the council to be sort of very aware of. I know that the grounds, we've done so much work with the museum, and it's in great shape, but our grounds are not good, are not accessible. The fact that we mostly have gravel, we get that a lot. That people that have limited mobility and wheelchairs, walkers, cannot circulate on our grounds. And I think with COVID and beyond, you know, the grounds are beautiful. We have one of the best views on Qualicum Beach. That is something that I think as a community we have to really focus on. The museum, we've made the buildings accessible, but the ground has to be more accessible. So something to please keep in mind. New permanent exhibits for the Powerhouse, I mentioned, we'll be working on completing more fencing, getting rid slowly but surely of all the chain link fence. And the Cubie Heritage House is something we have to think about in terms of what we want to do with that building. Currently it serves mostly as storage, but eventually we'd like to do some interpretation there. So thank you. Here's a slide of our Zoom board meetings that of course we all resorted to, but now we're back in person, and a staff photo that included Catherine Gagnon, which has stayed with us just temporarily, and she's now moved on to other things. And here's a lovely mix of photos of all the volunteers and members that make up this great organization.